Now we're talking about observing the Earth in its own particular universe area. Everyone is familiar with the dramatic changes in heating by the sun as the Earth rotates daily on its axis, causing daytime heating and nighttime cooling. Not quite as well understood by many is the annual change in seasons as the Earth revolves around the sun, because the Earth's axis of rotation is tilted by 23.5 degrees from the normal to the plane of its path around the sun. The northern hemisphere is inclined toward the sun during the summer and away from the sun during its winter. This causes greater heating and warming temperatures in summer than winter. This we learned in this elementary school. The southern hemisphere experiences the same effect but is 6 months out of phase with the northern hemisphere. The period of the Earth's rotation on its axis is approximately 24 hours, and the period of Earth's revolution around the sun is approximately 1 year. Other harmonic variations occur in the orbit of the Earth around the sun, which are familiar to only a few specialists. The Earth experiences a slight wobble as it rotates on its axis. This wobble, caused by the gravitational attraction between a slightly non-spherical Earth and the sun, moon, and planets, has a period of about 20,000 years. By this, it is meant that the small episodic changes measurable today imply a circle of about 20,000 years from maximum to maximum. In addition, the precession of the equinoxes, the migration of the positions of the axis of the elliptic path of the Earth around the sun, it's not a circle, it's an ellipse, also has a period of about 20,000 years. The angle of the Earth's axial tilt varies between 22 and 24 degrees, with a period of about 40,000 years. Another fluctuation is a 100,000-year periodic change in the eccentricity of the annual orbit from circular to elliptic and back again. Each of these small periodic changes, if allowed to experience a full cycle, would cause a small change in heating in Earth's atmosphere. When the periods of these orbital parameters were compared to the fluctuations in ice sheets and seafloor sediment thought to have been deposited over millions of years, a correlation was found. Spectral analysis of about a dozen seafloor sediment cores in the equatorial Pacific Ocean found peaks at 19, 23 to 41 in 100,000 years. All this, if you look at it closely, and only experts go into this stuff, they say, well, what does this mean and that? And they're being academic, but are they? The first three peaks match the periods for the wobble, precession, and tilt, which most strongly affect solar heating. However, the strongest cycle in the sediment record occurred at 100,000 years, which corresponds to the period of the eccentricity, the weakest influence on solar heating. Because of this correlation, many paleoclimatologists believe the astronomical theory has been proven. Nevertheless, several major weaknesses in the theory remain. So, if you went and read up on this stuff, you get a better handle on the experts who talk over your head all the time. They don't bother explaining anything. Problems with the astronomical theory. The long period elements of the Earth's orbit, precession, wobble, tilt, and eccentricity influence the solar radiation received, particularly in its geographical distribution. However, the total heating due to solar radiation integrated over the entire globe annually only varies significantly with eccentricity. Since the total heating due to the eccentricity varies by less than 0.2%, a major task, therefore, has been to show that this small change in heating, in fact, the smallest periodic fluctuation in solar heating, could lead to a cyclic glaciation of the Earth on the order of 100,000 years. The climate state of the Earth is not a simple function of total solar heating. It also appears to be dependent on the distribution by latitude. The Earth modulates solar heating by reflection, retention, and redistribution of received energy. A complete theory for the interaction of these effects has not been developed. Yet the conclusiveness of the evolutionists on this issue, the multi-glaciers, is nonsense then, without that supportive evidence. Because confidence is so high that in the statistical basis of the astronomical, I think it's for sure astronomical theory, as an explanation for the ice ages, the problems of the small amount of heating due to changes in eccentricity and on a lack of complete physical explanation for climate change has not led to abandonment of the theory. Instead, an assumed secondary feedback mechanism of some type has been hypothesized for ice age initiation. In other words, a small cooling pulse due to a periodic decrease in solar heating from changes in the orbital parameters triggers some unknown physical mechanism in the Earth atmosphere system, which leads to an ice age, repeated ice ages. How do you have an unknown, and you write books and books and books about this with all kinds of details, but you never explain what the unknown theory is, not even the plausible potential of it? Yeah, I just looked that up on the internet. The astronomical, with an R, the astronomical theory argues that long-term variations of the Earth's orbital parameters are the fundamental cause of the succession of ice ages during quaternary or even earlier geological periods. That's today, 2022. They still hold to that, regardless of the serious lack of evidence. So because confidence is so high in the statistical basis of the astronomical theory as an explanation for the ice ages, because they're imaginary statistics, the problems of a small amount of heating due to changes in eccentricity and a lack of complete physical explanation for climate change has not led to abandonment of the theory. Instead, an assumed secondary feedback mechanism of some type has been hypothesized for ice age initiation. Ergo, it's possible to have multiple ice ages, considering the fact that they considered a long time coming. In other words, a small cooling pulse during a periodic decrease in solar heating from changes in the orbital parameters triggers some unknown physical mechanism in the Earth atmosphere system, which leads to an ice age. Boulder Dash, that's a technical term. The implication of this approach is that the Earth atmosphere system is inherently unstable, and a small perturbation can change and create massive changes in the climate. Given enough time, investigators have attempted to show evidence for past climate instabilities using recent ice core results from the Greenland Ice Core Project, GRIP. That's a number of years ago, but later data from the Greenland Ice Sheet Project, GISP, invalidated this interpretation. Well, which do you choose? Extreme temperature fluctuations before the last ice age found in the GRIP ice core were not present in the GISP ice core. Evidence for climate instability continues to elude researchers. The existence of a climate trigger. Now this goes on today. We're so enthralled with climate change. You know, I lived in Florida for a while, and it was very interesting. I also lived in Texas in a river floodplain. And it's interesting that people refuse to move. And it's just the idea of climate change and everything else. The problem is periodically storms come and they blow everything away. Well, the storms have been coming for as long as you can remember. Yet people still will take a 10-year shot at building a house. Some of them don't even build it on stilts. After a while, they began to build it on stilts, but then they park the cars underneath the house. I was thinking, why wouldn't you park the car up on a ramp, put it up on a ramp, and drive it up into the house, especially in view of possible hurricane weather? No, they don't do that. They just keep rebuilding. And then the more they build, the more luxurious the houses are. They a lot of times they put them on stilts. But a larger hurricane comes along and away goes to the house anyway. And then they get money to rebuild. Same thing in that floodplain in Irving, Texas. And there's an actual big, huge 40-foot tall thermometer, or what it is, a gauge. And it talks about the water levels. And it shows when you're going in there how much water you are close to being swamped out of when the river overflows. And the river is known to overflow periodically for years and years and years, so many every decade or two. And then all of a sudden, you know it's coming, and nobody bothers to take effect at it And then when a house is destroyed, you could put in for flood insurance again. So the existence of a climate trigger, the connection between climate and fluctuations in solar heating due to orbital variations, is an assumption, not a proven mechanism, and has led to the wild speculations seen frequently in both technical and popular literature. If a trigger for ice ages truly exists in our Earth atmosphere system, then we should obviously be very careful not to do anything which could release that trigger. An inadvertent release of such a trigger could lead to possible chaotic weather conditions, flooding, and drought. Now, I also have another comment about the beaches I noticed in Florida, along the Gulf. They have great barriers out there in front to stop the sand from shifting from one area of the coast to another, so that you would lose your whole beach. But if it's been known that that's what happens all the time, should you put the barrier up, and sooner or later the barrier doesn't do that much effect, and you lose the beach anyway. And of course, the whole economy is set up on what kind of beach you have. It's nonsense. So, an inadvertent release of such a trigger could lead to possible chaotic weather conditions, flooding, and drought. Under such conditions, we should obviously restrict the release of pollutants into the atmosphere like smokes and particulates, which are known to produce cooling. However, the assumption of a trigger does not necessarily mean that one exists. In fact, much evidence suggests that the atmosphere is a very stable system, and catastrophic events are required to cause climatic changes as massive as an ice age. I believe the assumption of a trigger is the result of unjustified confidence in the astronomical theory, which in turn is based on uniformitarian processes over millions of years. The current research, which is being conducted at ICR, Institute of Creation Research, is beginning to demonstrate that the events of the Genesis flood would naturally produce an ice age. So you have to have a whole bunch of water over a huge region, if not the whole planet. And then the resulting climatic changes, as we discussed, the heating up of one ocean instead of cooling down. And then the ocean part then causes moisture in the air to cause snow. And then you have moisture later on in the winter. And then we have climatic changes. In any case, the residual heat remaining in the oceans after the flood would release tremendous quantities of moisture and fall as snow in the polar regions. Remember, we got 5,000 plus mammoths in Siberia and Alaska. And we have that buried in the permafrost, right? Well, that's soil. And in that soil, there's a bunch of dead mammals, animals, no humans. I don't know, we may have found a few here or there. And that is as a result of the climate change that was catastrophic. And how did they get that? Before that, was it 100 million years before that? The mammoths wound around, but how did the mammoths didn't get fossilized? A lot of times the weather was so severe that it ripped apart animals from their limbs and bodies, and yet those were suddenly frozen, and you go out there and start digging into the ice in Siberia and Alaska, you got meat to sell. Mammoth meat. The residual heat remaining in the oceans after the flood would release tremendous quantities of moisture and fall as snow, as I said, in the polar regions and on mountains for several hundred years after the flood. And we had about a couple thousand there until Abraham. If ice sheets and layers of sea floor sediments were not laid down slowly over long periods of time, but rapidly over the last few thousand years, following the global flood described in Genesis, then the astronomical theory is completely wrong. If the astronomical theory is wrong, there is no need for a trigger, and the concern for a fragile, unstable atmosphere, which can suddenly revert to a new ice age, is unjustified. There you go.